Bună ziua! Numele meu este Nicoleta Martin și am marea plăcere de a vă spune bun venit astăzi la acest eveniment din partea organizatorilor, Asociația Parcului Natural Văcărești, Asociația Funky Citizens, Fundația Centrul de Ecologie Montană, Asociația SOS Cluj și Societatea Carpatină Ardeleană Satu Mare. Vă mulțumim că ați ales să veniți în seara aceasta aici, la noi. Vreau să mulțumesc invitațiilor noștri, Ignace Schops, fondatorul primului parc național din Belgia, Florin Stoican, fondatorul celui mai tânăr parc național din România și cofondatorul Parcului Natural Văcărești. Vreau să mulțumesc Anca Iosif, jurnalist de mediu, care va modera dialogul din seara aceasta. Vreau să mulțumesc și partenerilor din Coaliția pentru Natură Urbană, Asociația Ruralis din Bistrița, Asociația Biotim din Timișoara, Fundația Ecotop din Oradea, Asociația Excelsior din Arad, Asociația Civica, împreună cu Societatea Ornitologică Română la Iași, Asociația Fotografilor de Natură din România și am zis de parteneri, dar mai avem în rețea 9 orașe, dintre care cred că aici sunt 7 cel puțin reprezentanți din 7 orașe, deci reprezentanții ai naturii urbane din 7 orașe. Dar am uitat Asociația Walden din Piatra Neamț. Așa. Vreau să vă mai spun că în acest proiect sunt alături de noi cei de la Asociația Municipiilor din România, care ne sprijină în tot demersul de constituire a rețelei de aree naturale urbane. Și mai vreau să mulțumesc gazdelor noastre de aici, de la noi, care ne-au pus la dispoziție acest spațiu minunat pentru întâlnirea din seara aceasta. Vreau să mulțumesc Fundației Ashoka, care ne-a facilitat legătura cu Ignace și ne-a sprijinit în organizarea acestui eveniment. Și vreau să vă mai spun că evenimentul face parte dintr-un proiect mai mare, care se cheamă Ariile Naturale Protejate Urbane, Natura la ușa ta, și care este finanțat prin programul Active Citizens Fund. Mulțumim mult că sunteți aici. Eu sunt convinsă că o să avem 2 ore foarte pline și că cred că fiecare dintre noi o să ne întoarcem după aceea cu mai multe speranțe și cu și mai multe alternative.
Salut! Bună, vă mulțumesc și eu că ați venit în seara asta aici. O să trec pe engleză, ca să ne înțelegem cu toții. First of all, I'm very happy to be here in this context, to have 2 hours with you guys and talk about conservation. I think the moment is perfect and the place is perfect because, unlike other countries, in Romania we can talk about conserving what we have, as we were talking also. Can turn it off. About conserving what we have. Acum am auzit? Da. Okay. It's nice to have these problems again after 2 years of Zooming debates. Okay, so I was saying that we're happy in Romania to have the context more privileged to talk about conservation, conserving what we have, wild species and wild flora, fauna. So we'll talk about that more, and we're here to learn from a special guest. I will present him just in a few seconds. First of all, a few technical things. We'll talk around half an hour, maybe 45 minutes, and then we're going to open the discussion for you. So please raise your hand and don't be shy, because we're here to have a dialogue, and Nico will be with a microphone to get to you guys. And yeah, that's it. So, I will present you my special guest, who is Florin Stoican, who is a geologist specialized in the management of protected areas, biodiversity and geodiversity conservation, ecotourism and ecological education. He is the president of Cogaion Association, the one that founded Dorința National Park, and the Văcărești National Park Association, the one that started the work for the conservation of that park 10 years ago. And he's also one of the 8 Ashoka fellows from Romania. Ignace Schops is an environmentalist, a biodiversity and landscape expert. He is the director of the Belgian NGO Regional Landscape Kempen and Masla, and he was also for many years the president of Park Federation, the largest network of natural heritage in Europe. Almost 15 years ago, Ignace was awarded the Goldman Environmental Prize, the Green Nobel Prize as it's called, for helping with the foundation of Hoge Kempen National Park, the first national park of Belgium. Later, because of his efforts, he also became an Ashoka Fellow, a world-leading social entrepreneur. So I'm happy to be in this company today, and I say to start, it's the moment to start the conversation. Ignace, let's start with the story of the national park. What made the fight worth the while, and who were your allies?
Yes, thank you for the introduction. So the place where I come from in Belgium, in the northeastern part, not that far from the Dutch border, people maybe have heard of Maastricht, where the euro was born. So that's in that neighborhood is my working area. It's a former coal mining region. So the last coal mine was closed in 1991, and directly and indirectly 60,000 people became employed. So it was a very harsh period for Belgians, for people of my community, of course, and the government wants to re-industrialize the region and big reconversion plans, but we thought we had an alternative, because the region had such a beautiful scenery, landscaping, fantastic wildlife. So we came up with an idea, and it was the first step, that was to organize a cycling network, to invite people to the most beautiful region after Romania. So we developed a cycling network, and it was immediately successful, because people understand that the beautiful scenery was something that really was close to their hearts. And that was the reason then when we started, and I must admit, after drinking some good Belgian beers, to make nature sexy. And to make nature sexy was to make the first and still only national park Belgium has. It was 1997, and then many years later, in 2006, we opened and launched the first and only national park, Hoge Kempen National Park, which was in an international context not that big. It was 6,000 hectares. So in an international context it's very small, of course, but in a very urbanized region like Western Europe, it is rather okay. And so now we doubled the surface, but maybe that's something I come back to later.
So where do you start, and who is there by your side? Other NGOs?
So we started with 4 friends, and then we said, okay, let's make nature sexy. How to do so? Yeah, you start an organization. So you start like that, and then you start to have conversations with many groups and people. So the thing that I did the most, I think, was drinking coffee. All the time, inviting people, talking to people, finding opportunities to try to influence also decision makers. You must know that I'm an herpetologist, so I did some research on lizards and snakes and frogs, and I started to lobby, of course, to the ministers that they have to give us the benefit of the doubt and give us the opportunity to make a national park. But they couldn't understand what I was talking about, because I was talking about tree frogs and lizards, and they could not make any policy out of my stories about species. So for me, it was also a good answer because that told me that I have to translate biodiversity into a language that they could understand, that they could relate to. So that's what I did years later, to try to translate biodiversity in a language they could understand, and it still is socio-economic language. So they have to know what is the impact of protecting wildlife in a sense of jobs, in a sense of economy for the local community. So we start then bottom up, not top down, but bottom up, asking for developing a national park, and then many years later they decided to do so. So we got the benefit of the doubt and a small amount of seed money, not on our account, but it was in Brussels somewhere. What we need to double, so we had to find match funding. And since then it became a huge success. And so just to give you an idea, it was a big dream once within a harsh period, and now it's one of the most successful, I think, models that we created in this national park, because we created that model which is called the reconnection model. We try to reconnect society with nature, and if you compare it to Romania, for instance, sometimes the connection is still there, so you don't have to reconnect, you have to only connect. So we had to reconnect, so that's 4, let's say, important sentences: reconnect nature with nature, reconnect people with nature, reconnect businesses with nature, and reconnect policy with practice. So that's what we have done, and now just to give you some numbers, so about the investment rate, in the first 10 years we could invest more than 120 million euros, so which is a huge thing, and because we didn't focus on the borders of the national park, but on a much broader focus area, and when we existed 10 years in 2016, because we were established in 2006, I proposed a new dream to all the stakeholders, which are politicians, but also corporates and so on, and local communities and local NGOs, to make the national park twice as big, twice as beautiful, and twice as strong. And to give you again numbers, so in the next 5 years we allocated with several parts again more than 100 million euros to invest again in and in the surroundings of the national park. And the outcome, and now these are big numbers, the outcome, what comes out socio-economically of the national park, so we did some calculations, what are the ecosystem services, you could say. We used their international methodology, that's not that important. But we have an annual turnover of 191 million euros and 5,000 jobs. So certainly, politically seen, they could say that protecting wildlife is also investing in the local communities and socio-economic benefits. And we know now from research done in Europe, but also in other continents globally, that for the bigger nature reserves like UNESCO World Heritage and the Marele Biosphere Reserve or national parks, so that €1 invested in a national park or a bigger reserve benefits €10 for the local economy. So if you are looking for a new banking company, the best banking company is the nature bank.
Let's talk about, a bit about the involvement of the citizens. How did it change maybe along the years? How are Belgians are getting involved? Because for Romania, most of the people that want to get involved are from the urban areas because we like nature, we want, but...
Yeah, that's something what could really be relevant for you as well, because you have still abundance of nature. If you compare that to an urbanized country like Belgium. So we were about to lose our nature, so let's say our conviction, we were so convinced to have then the protection of nature that helped, of course. But the local, our question was, and that's your question as well, can we develop something that the local people, local community, can become ambassadors for the park? Because before that period, it was, there was a lot of nature over there that was outdoors, not interesting. So we designed a kind of a model within this reconnection model where we went out, for instance, with all the hotel managers, and we really actually told them, now your big commercial part is not the front door but the back door. And we stepped down the back door because that's where the national park started. And they were only communicating to the front door where the motorway was. So gold is lying in your backyard, so we have to communicate that several times, and suddenly it starts to get there. And then they started to promote their hotels as part of the national park and so on and so forth. And of course they make money, more than before. When we go to one of the things of the success model, success factors in this model is that we organized all the visitor facilities outside the park, close to the local communities. So the butcher and the bakeries and the B&Bs and the pubs, that's where the people go to, and that's where the money needs to be earned, of course. And that's sometimes kilometers away of the national park. But suddenly, of course, because the amount of visitors in these small villages, they were increasing, they are making money again. So the bakery manager became an ambassador for the national park because of the simple fact that he was making more money than before. So these are simple things of thinking, standing in the position of an entrepreneur, standing in the position of a farmer, standing in the position of, let's say, can we make these people into ambassadors? And sometimes it failed, of course, and it's not only a success story, but in many cases, I think we won, and so that's why we have in my region, we have let's say, I will translate a county newspaper, so a provincial newspaper, and they have like 90% of all the people they cover every day, and if they write articles about the national park, they communicate as our park. And that's, of course, when we hit bullseye, it's not the park of the green environmentalists, it's our park, it's of our community. And that's, I think, the biggest success.
Florin, do you want to also say a few words about what ambassadors can Văcărești Park have, and also what kind of ambassador can the park become? Because you were saying also earlier today that Văcărești can become an ambassador for other areas, so I think it's a nice story for them to hear too.
Yes, but I want to be short because I want to listen from the Ignace, his experience.
I think that is true.
Just a few words about Văcărești and the importance of the nature inside the cities. This place is in the middle of 10% of Romanian population, and this mean has a huge potential to educate the people, to bring people in nature, and to convince people to take care about the nature in the rest of Romania. And I will say something only to point the difference between Romania and the west part of the Europe, including Belgium. The biggest difference is nature. We have nature, they have still some piece of nature, but they make a lot of mistakes. And we are so stupid now to repeat the same mistake. Let's be smart to try to don't do it again, the same mistake, and to preserve the nature. Because we as a Romania, we are a leader in Europe, at least in European Union, for biodiversity. And we need to be leader for nature conservation and also leader for benefits obtained by local communities by conserving nature. I like it very much, the experience of Ignace in Belgium, and I advise you to profit about that and ask him about the experience, because we need also to find a key to go together as Romanians in this direction, to be part of the not environmental movement, social movement for conservation of nature.
Let's talk about a bit about Europark as well. Maybe for those of us, I include myself because I don't know so many details as well, maybe you can tell us about this federation and who can be a part of it and what are the benefits for the members.
Europark Federation has originated in 1972 in Switzerland. It has now approximately 430 members in 40 European European countries. Yes, yes. This is better. Yeah. So, 430 members in 40 pan-European countries, covering 40 million hectares of wildlife. So it's the biggest network in Europe for protected areas. And the beauty of that is that, of course, wherever you are working for wildlife, if it is Romania or Belgium or Spain or Finland, you occur with the same problems, but often different of scale. This is a park, Văcărești, of 183 hectares, and for me it's 12,000 hectares, and for other parks it's 120,000 hectares. But they have problems with tourism, they have problems with wildlife management, they have problems with how to promote themselves. So within this organization, we come together and we discuss these problems. That's the one thing that is very exchange knowledge, and the good thing is we are all, let's say, the same people who want to safeguard our planet, so that we have no discussion about that, about the big goal. What was interesting for me when I came in as a president 8 years ago was that Europark Federation is the largest network on the natural heritage in Europe. And during the years, we have forgotten the cultural heritage. So it was all about protected areas, national parks, regional parks, protected areas as such. But of course, when you are in Romania, the culture is completely different than in Belgium. And what we see now is we have to open up to the broader society. What Florian was saying is about social inclusion. How can we attract to people? So that was one of the first things I did in the Europark Federation, to bring in that culture part again, because it really connects people with the culture of the region. Sometimes it's fantastic to see what happens over there, and you are opening up to a much broader audience than before. So, biggest network in Europe. If you compare that to the other networks in the world and Europe, you have the World Conservation Union, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the biggest network in the world, who is responsible for the categories, if you are a national park or not. But if you compare both, and we do our, let's say, our work together, then this, the IUCN more the observer, the governmental body, if you could name that as that, and we are boots on the ground as Europark Federation. Every year we do kind of conferences, we do transboundary projects, and the good thing is that we try to articulate and find a translation of nature in another way. A big thing at the moment, I told before noon about the relation between health, our health and nature, is a project that we adopted from Australia, which is now, I think, hopefully can also evolve in Europe and maybe in Romania. It's called Healthy Parks, Healthy People. So, because we know out of science now that the more people are connected with nature, the more healthy they are in prevention and also in curation. So it is a really hot topic because it connects immediate people in a different way with nature. So healthy parks, healthy people is something. The other thing what Europark is very successful in is the Charter for Sustainable Tourism, because lots of regions, they cope with how to deal with tourism. People come, how to deal with that, so they have to then sit together, the pub owner and the B&B and the butcher and the bakery, and they have to make a plan together and say how can we become more sustainable and attract more people in a sustainable way and things like that. So it's bringing people together to do more. So, and we have calculations of that I think after 10 years of the Charter, 72 million new visitors were visiting across Europe. So Europark Federation is an interesting organization. What we did in Belgium when we came in many years ago, if we have done European projects, so where you can attract extra funding from the European Union, we found our partners always in this kind of network. And so that could be interesting as well for you if you think about that, because one of the things, so connected to the urban nature, what the topic of today is. So within my presidency, I had then the opportunity to merge, to incorporate Natură. Natură was at the time the biggest network for peri-urban parks, so they are now having their home in rural park as well. So it's interesting just to look into it. Sometimes it fits and you say, wow, this is such a beautiful organization, and maybe for other people, for other organizations, well, it's a nice thing, but it's not something for me. So it's open, it's free, but it is like a little bit like here, like Ashoka is organized. You have to open up to see it, and if you don't see it, there's nothing wrong about it. Everybody is free to do so, but it's an open organization with a lot of, yeah, is it even possible to say, with a lot of love inside? And I think we have to talk more about love also if it is about nature.
You were talking a lot about partnerships, and I have to ask, how is the partnership with the lawmakers? How can we make them listen more, be more interested in the projects of conservation, be our partners along the way?
Yeah, I told it a little bit because I'm an herpetologist, and I just finished a book. It's called Saved by the Tree Frog. So if we save this tree frog, the tree frog will save us, and if we don't save the tree frog, to read between brackets nature, if we don't save nature, nature cannot save us, and we will not survive. So, but when I went to the ministers at the time, 25 and 30 years ago, and talking about these stories about tree frogs, these persons are not minister anymore, and they say to me, I know your stories, and they are fantastic, but I couldn't make any policy out of that. That was one thing. Secondly, a tree frog doesn't run to the people's house here, the parliament, to say, hey, you have to protect me. So that is not, a tree frog cannot do that, or a wolf, or whatever animal, or flower. So we, as human beings, we can. And that's why I always say, value is in the eye of the beholder. We give value. If we decide to give value to nature, nature will have a value. And if you compare, just to give you to compare with, so if we think that Van Gogh, the painter Van Gogh, the sunflowers is valuable, we give it value, millions and millions. But if we decide not to value that painting, it will be worth nothing. So we, people, give value. And that's, I think, so important with the urban protected areas, what Florian and you are doing, of course, because that's where awareness and support starts, because the amount of people that you can attract of Romania, of Bucharest here, the first time children bringing in the park, be astonished about the beauty of nature, that makes a hell of a difference in their approach to nature. And that helps, I think, to create that value, and that's what, and I'm very pleased with your answer, Florian, that we have made so many mistakes. And I always say that why do we have to ask the developing countries to protect the rainforest if we even cannot protect our own backyards? Because we couldn't protect our backyards. So we have a huge responsibility now to safeguard the small pieces of nature that we still have left, to give a signal to all, like also Romania, this is powerful, we are nature. This is powerful, you are the cradle, and that's maybe something we have to discuss later, but how can we help Romania? How can we help you, maybe even at the European level, to talk to each other when the policymakers talk to each other, and that we convince them that you have something. This is life that you have in your hands. And so because I live near 80 kilometers from Brussels, if I have the opportunity and you have a question, I will go for you to the European Commission. I will try to convince the Commission to say to Romania, hey, please protect the urban nature and the bigger nature as well. It's so important, and I always say there are many gradations in help. It's worth fighting for every species.
Another discussion we were having other time with the people from Văcărești Association, and also in my field in journalism, when I'm writing about the environment, for example, sometimes I reach only the people that are already interested in the environment. It's the same problem sometimes for the NGOs. Even if I look in this room today, so many faces are familiar. How do we break this bubble? I mean, how?
The million-dollar question. So yes, preaching for the own church, and that's what we all do. And you are convinced, and I'm already convinced, and we are more convinced at the end that nothing changes. So the question is how to bridge with the other stakeholders that are not stakeholder yet. And I think we have to mirror ourselves. Because if we do what we have always done, you get what you always got. So we have to find new methodologies, new ways of convincing other parties, other stakeholders. And it starts with us, so we have to go out. So this means that, for instance, what we did, visitor centers are not included in the park, but we bring them into the local communities. When entrepreneurial networks meet annually, you go to their network events and you just propose. And when I started to do so 30 years ago, and I came in these meetings, these annual meetings with a lot of champagne and things, and then I came in, who's that? Is he allowed to come in here? Because it was something like, you don't talk with entrepreneurs. Also from the environmental community, it was said that you don't talk with politicians, and you cannot talk with CEOs of enterprises because they are bad stuff. So, and I always was the opening, so the bridge builders say, no, they have another responsibility than I have, but fundamentally, we are talking about life. He for his children, Risk for his company, but we have to try to connect with them. So it's a huge thing with a lot of energy to give and to get as well. But if you, and that's the other message that I gave before noon, you build networks if you don't need it. Does it mean that you have to invest in networks if you don't need it? Then you have a kind of a relationship that you can build up, say, okay, he's a nice guy, a nice girl, he talks interesting, and then after 3 or 4 years, when you have a question, at least you have a listening ear, because you have a relationship with that. So that helps. So you have to preach for your church, of course, but then you have to, you have to go out. And it's hard work in a sense. But on the other hand, you get a lot of information back, also to learn, because again, the target group, the group who you talk to, they talk a different language, have a different jargon, if they call it, not a language. You talk to farmers on a different way, with problems with bears and wolves, than you talk to politicians. That's something we have to learn ourselves. And I think when I look to the European and maybe the global environmental community, over the years, we were very good in saying how to do. I know how it needs to be done, so and you have to listen. So it was more like I think we were correct, but it's not a way to do so. To say, we know how things work, how nature works, and you have to listen. No, you have to be open. What is your problem? Can we help? Maybe I cannot answer today, but we will go back and we come back to you. So it's an open conversation about equality. But again, of course, to give evidence of the value of nature. And of course, you can talk about the intrinsic values, and that it's good when you do it in your own church, intrinsic values, but go to the first pub and you start about intrinsic values and you say, So it's about, what is the conversation then? Can you explain how valuable nature is when you sit in a pub? And often people start, you have to protect nature, I'm also for protection. You do them in the park, No, nature starts at your flowering pot, at your home. We cannot protect wildlife only in the protected areas, because otherwise then we are jailing protected areas. We are putting them in a jail, we are jail keepers. No, nature needs to be everywhere. And now, since we have more and more evidence of the socio-economic benefits of nature, the health benefits of nature, also the benefits of the benefits for farming, because what we tend to forget is that biodiversity is not only about the birds and the bees, it's also about the soil biodiversity, microorganisms in the ground. So we know that also the soil biodiversity is going downwards So also the production of our food becomes in stress. And if you look to the body biodiversity, so we have 150 trillion living creatures, very small ones, in and on our body, with entire ecosystems. They are collapsing as well, like biodiversity is collapsing. So if you talk about biodiversity, it's not about only the birds and the bees, it's about the water we drink, the air we breathe, the food we eat, the health we have. And that's something we need to express and to try to educate other groups with. And I think everybody needs to be interested, because what we see is when you raise your temperature with 1 degree, then you go to a doctor. So, and you could read what is happening with the planet on your own body, because global warming, when it goes up, so the planet is sick, so we have to do something. We have 1 decade, this decade, and this will be decisive. We have the time still to do the right thing, and that becomes a huge problem. And that's something I did a lot of research on. Is it possible to shift into the right direction of sustainability in 10 years' time, in a decade? Is it possible? And if you allow me, I'm a storyteller. I can start and talk until 10 o'clock in the evening if you let me. But interesting to know is that, maybe you know this story. In 1961, there was a president in the United States who went to a university and started to give a keynote speech. And he said something like this: I want to have a man on the moon in the next decade. I don't know how. Maybe a giant rocket, but yeah, we will see. I want to have a man on the moon in the next decade. And in a nutshell, what happened was that in 1969, Neil Armstrong put his first left foot on the moon and said, a small step for man and a giant leap for mankind. So in 10 years' time, it was possible for systemically, you put a man on the moon. And if you think about that, and you imagine now, there are so many cars in Bucharest, you don't see that many cyclists. But think about the car industry. The first Ford, the brand Ford, the first Ford was 1901. It was called the Ford T. So I often give lectures globally in lots of parts of the world, and I always ask them to politicians as well. Do you think that Ford or another brand, Volkswagen, whatever, was the element to make the car industry so successful? Wasn't because of the Ford T or another brand. And then politicians do this. They start to look at their toes because they don't want to answer. They don't know the answer, and they do like this. And then I said, of course, it was not because of Ford T that the car industry became so successful. What made the car industry so successful? It was that governments, countries were constructing roads, because Ford was not constructing the roads, it was governments. They saw that if we construct the infrastructure, this is fantastic for the economy. And think about that. What happened with our water system in your tap at home? What with your electricity? The investments needed for the system were 90% were made by governments. So if we now have to shift to a climate-friendly and energy-neutral society, we have to call our politicians to say, you have to invest in the system. So you have to invest in solar panels, in energy, into whatever, earth warmth, windmills and things like that. That's their responsibility. Because what you see nowadays on a global level and also in Europe is that, and that's I find it really hard to fight for, is that the one thing is the individualization of the problem. They say, you're still flying. This is not climate friendly. And so, yeah, you start to have something strange. Okay, can I fly? And maybe it's good not to fly too much, but it's not an individual problem. That's what politicians like to do, because it's an individual problem. No, it's a systemic problem. They have to really make the flight industry change completely, that we fly on solar panels, whatever, but they have to make the infrastructure. And then, of course, we can apply happily on that. And of course, we have to think not to fly every day and things like that, but it's not an individual problem, it's a global problem, and we have to structural work on that. And the second part of that is, so the individualization is a problem. The other thing is that, to my opinion, is we need to depoliticize the problem of biodiversity loss and climate change. Because what you see now, it's the green parties, they want climate change, they are climate change friendly and biodiversity friendly, and the right-wing parties, they are against. And this is not something of a political party, this is something about all the political parties. So we have to depoliticize, is it the right word?
We could.
Yeah,
We get it.
You get it? Okay. I don't know. But this is what we need to do, and I'm lucky that because of my history, that I can talk every now and then with Elcor and these kind of persons. And he told me that 2 years ago in Berlin, that looking back to his career, that with the inconvenient truth in 2006, he politicized, well, I don't know what it is. Yeah, you understand that. I don't know if this is the correct word now. But he was bringing that to the political level of a party, because he brought that as a vice president of the United States. So the Republicans were against and the Democrats were for. So from that moment on, it was a political question and not a question of every one of us. So we need to really try to emphasize and to raise awareness for this. This is not about politics, this is about survival. And it's simple physics, huh? Climate change and emitting carbon dioxide, it's physics. If you emit too much, we will be, how to say, we will be roasted. There's a beautiful saying in that, roasted, toasted, fried and grilled, said the director of the World Bank, Lagarde, I think 5 years ago. Take this one.
Because you mentioned climate change, I was wondering how can we stress more maybe the importance of urban parks for the fight against climate change? How could we tell that story better and clearer for groups outside our law?
Not a big topic of climate change, but it starts with, again, data. So what is the carbon sequestration of the green infrastructure of parks in big cities? Because what we know, and it's called nature-based solutions, are often the best solutions for sequestration of climate change. It's also very cheap compared to the technical solutions that they try to promote, but they are not successful at the moment. So it starts with education again, and see that we have a living air conditioner everywhere. So every tree is an air conditioner, and you don't have to feed them. It works by itself. It's a simple thing. If Elon Musk should come with an idea that he had invented a new air conditioner that was regenerating in itself, the world would be astonished. And then if he would say, it's a tree, yeah, maybe we're there then. So we need Elon Musk now maybe to invent a tree again. So, but yeah, I'm an activist as well in Belgium. So what I saw, I was in 2015, I was at the climate agreement preparation in Paris. And of course, suddenly there was an agreement to stay far below 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees maximum global warming. And we were all applauding, and I was even in tears, so happy that I was, that at least we had found a solution for the planet, for the future. But then, of course, we came into a new, let's say, era, that we understand that there is a big difference between what you say and what you sign and what you do. So what we saw was that Belgium was not fulfilling the obligations they had signed at the climate agreement in Paris. And if you make an agreement with whoever in your garden, for your car, for buying a house, if you sign an agreement, you have to fulfill your obligations. And we thought that also governments had the same responsibility if they have signed an agreement. So what we did, because I'm an activist, like I told, so I was singing, dancing, protesting for nature and for wildlife, and often the ministers, they came with me on the picture. They said, yes, it's so important. But for climate, it didn't make any sense because they were not fulfilling their obligations. So then we were looking into history, and maybe to give you a kind of a flavor, we came to the to census in this, with the asbestos case. You know, asbestos is very cancerous, and it was not that governments globally thought, oh, this is so cancerous, let's now forbid it. It didn't work like that. It was, asbestos was used, people got sick, they died, research was done, scientific research was done, protesting came, and suddenly they started to sue the governments for not forbidding asbestos. And due to the outcome of the court cases, governments decided to forbid asbestos. So what we did with climate now, so we now sued the Belgian governments for not fulfilling their obligations. And the only thing, and so I started with 11 friends, another organization, which is called the Climate Case, where we openly and democratically and very transparently talk to the politicians and say, hey, we have a problem, you don't fulfill your obligations, we are going to court now, very openly, and we let the judge decide who is correct. And in my opinion, I thought we have, because that was a question, how can also we use the local communities with that? So I thought maybe I can start a movement with that as well, because otherwise it would be easy to say, oh, you are the green guy, and then just one guy was doing the wrong thing, so how to say, outskirts. And so I started kind of a movement to ask people, common people from Belgium, to go with me to court. So with my 11 friends. And now we are evolved, we have won the first part, so we are 67,000 people going to court to the Belgian government because they don't fulfill their obligations. So it's the biggest case globally for climate people versus the state. And we openly discuss it with politicians. So it's not something like Extinction Rebellion where we do things that are not legal. So it's an open democratic model to discuss and so to become, as soon as possible, the asbestos of the future. That's the idea behind it. And what we see now is that globally, since the action was firstly started in the Netherlands, we were the second case in the world, and now, just to give you an overview, there are approximately 2,000 climate court cases running, also in Germany, also in France, and they win. All these court cases are winning, so these are these domino blocks falling, and that is very interesting because I keep on talking here. So we have Ursula von der Leyen, maybe, and the president of the European Commission. She was at the World Economic Forum in April, no, it was in February this year. And then she stated that she would love to have a biodiversity agreement like the Paris Agreement. So what she did is taking again promptly the lead as a continent and saying, hey, I would like a Paris-like agreement for biodiversity, which then of course makes it also possible for local organizations to go to this government and say, yeah, if you signed an agreement for biodiversity, you have to fulfill. And the last thing I would like to say is that I think that nature is feminine, is female, because what you see now is caring for Mother Earth. We call it Mother Earth, of course. And what we see over the years is that if these things are shifting, it's often young ladies, young girls or women that makes the difference. We know now Greta Thunberg, of course, everybody knows her, but in 1992 there was the Earth Summit that was the, let's say, the predecessor of the Kyoto Protocol, which is now the climate agreement. And then there was a little girl of 12 years old, Severin Suzuki, her name is, she's a Canadian environmentalist, who went to Rio de Janeiro and she told all these decision makers, it is not what you say, it is what you do. So she was the first Greta Thunberg, Severin Suzuki. Now you have Greta Thunberg, but now, very interestingly, is that the economic sector, and that's the interesting thing, what was not happening 5 years ago, becomes aware that biodiversity and climate change are their problems. So the World Economic Forum, every year, that's, let's say, the holy church of economy, every year they do a risk report. What are the biggest risks for the economy for the future? And the two biggest risks the last 3 years is biodiversity and climate change. So they know that if they don't find solutions for global warming and biodiversity, they will fail as well. So I always say it as there will be no business on a dense planet. And if you then go far way back to the Indians in the United States, you have Chief Seattle, for those who know this Indian leader, 1843, he said something very beautiful, in my opinion. And he said, only when the last river is poisoned, only when the last tree is fallen, only then mankind will know they cannot eat money. So that was 1843. So, and that's happening nowadays, and I'm also a member of the Club of Rome, maybe you heard of that, the Club of Rome. So in 1972, that was the moment, I think, when the awareness came from the environmental movement globally. So the Club of Rome, they wrote a book, it was Limits to Growth. There are limits to our, so let's say, liberal economic system. And so this book, Limits to Growth, is reviewed several times, and still today, 80% of what they stated in 1972 is still correct. And so this is the positive view. We know what the problem is, we know how to solve it, and now it's up to us. So the only problem is not that we aren't inventive enough, if we are still creative enough, we have the solutions. The only problem we have is time. Because we have 10 years time to find the real solutions. If we wait longer, there will be mechanisms then that they will occur that we cannot control anymore. So we have this decade. And the good thing is that I saw so many young people already there in the room as well. So you have the world upon your shoulders. You can find all these new things for the future. And I think we have to give the floor to them as well, to the young people, say, come on, we support you, we give you the seat in the front line because you are the future. And we have to give our respect and our trust in them as well. I talked too much.
If there are questions, we can start taking some of them.
But you can ask us.
Yes, I start with the question. Ignace, we know all in Europe, theoretically we are a leader of biodiversity conservation because we have a Green Deal and we have a biodiversity strategy with some targets. At least we have some targets. And these two targets is to have 30% of the territory protected areas and 10% strictly protected areas. How is the situation in Belgium is possible? And the second question is, it's enough, these targets globally on the planet? Because, for example, Europe has only 4% of the global forest.
Interesting. Yeah. So every 10 years, Europe and also the world is making a new plan for the future. So for 2010, it was halting the loss of biodiversity, and I was a global ambassador then for ICN. Then the 2020 biodiversity strategy of the EU, we didn't succeed at all, and now we have a biodiversity strategy by 2030 by the year. The good thing is, of course, when you look into the EU, the former commission was jobs, jobs, jobs. Now we have a Green Deal. For the first time, the European continent takes the lead on a global level to go to sustainability, circularity, from farm to fork, social inclusion, climate friendly, and so that's the good thing. So within this policy, the biodiversity strategy of Europe is the big thing is 30% protected, 10% strict protected, and on a global level, it needs to be done by the Convention on Biological Diversity. So at the UN level, normally they have decided upon last year, but because of COVID, it was not possible to meet each other. The meeting will now be in September, I think, in Kunming in China, where they will agree again about the same goal, 30% in 2030 protected and 10% strict protected. The former goal at the UN level, that were the IKI targets made in Nagoya, I was there as well, and then at that time was 17% protected. So now we go from 17% to 30%. The question is then, is this possible and is this enough? So if you look into my country, and to Flanders, we have on paper 26% protected nature on paper. Nature reserves of that 26% is just 7%, and managed 2%. So we are not there yet.
It's the same.
That's everywhere. And the other thing is that, is this enough? Is 30% enough to survive? And there is a very interesting scientist who died last year, Edward O. Wilson. He was an ant specialist, so he was looking into ants, and I think he scientifically found 140 new species in his life. But he said something, again, I was lucky to meet him twice. Once in Hawaii even, it was a beautiful place. But he said this: the most dangerous worldview is the worldview of those who have not viewed the world. So if what you do in your school, in your street, at the European level, at the Romanian level, in your park in Bucharest, you have to have your worldview. What is going on a global perspective, and what can I do from that point of view? And he wrote a book, and it's called Half-Earth. So if we want to survive, we need to safeguard at least 80% of all the species that are still living. And if we want to have them survive, then we need to protect 50% of the earth for wildlife. 50. The question is then, is this possible? Yes, it is. And he describes this very beautifully. It's not like half of it is nature and on the other half is urbanization. No, it's a kind of a marble thing, so it's all integrated. But it is still possible to do so. And I think we need to have the ambition to go for 50%. And the more we can give evidence of the economic positive benefits of that, and what we see now related to climate change, because climate change and biodiversity are two sides of the same coin, of course. You see that when we invest in climate-friendly policies, we are investing in good things. Even if there was no climate problem, or even if there was no global warming, all the investments that we now propose from the, let's say, the environmental community are good things. So even though if there was no problem, that was still good to do, to invest in these things. And the good thing is there, and I hope that you listened well, I always talk about investment. Because what do politicians tend to say is that it's a cost. No, it is not a cost, it is an investment. So this means that there is a return on investment. This is calculated by the World Bank. The return on investment for climate change investments are huge in jobs and in economy. So again, we know how to do so. There is cold water fear, of course, with a lot of politicians, because, you know, that's something we need to learn as well. To try to stand in the shoes of the politicians as well every now and then, because they have to make the decision. So I was talking to the first minister in the Netherlands 10 years ago. So Shell, the oil company, they came to the first minister in the Netherlands and said, if you go further with making it less possible for us to emit and to do our job, then we will relocate the headquarters of Shell into another continent. So 30,000 people will become unemployed. Then you are the first minister of the Netherlands, and then I can imagine that he thinks, oh shit, how to deal with that? 30,000 people. So you have to go into these shoes as well to know how they think, and then what can then be the solutions for them to give them arguments to say, and we will go down, we will do it differently. He didn't do that, so now we sued also Shell, and I don't know if you know, but Shell also lost the case. Huh? So what is now happening in the Netherlands is something very interesting for the activists about surrounding us. So in the Netherlands now, the 29 most emitting companies have got a letter of the organization that sued Shell and said to them, those companies, what is your back planning? So if we have to be climate friendly, climate neutral in 2050, what will be your case in 2040 and what will be your case in 2030? And if you cannot give us a real solution, because then we sue you. And because they won, Shell, which is, Shell is bigger than France and Italy in economy together, right? So it's really big. Huh? So they're now getting scared, you know? And this is something interesting because it's not about suing them, it's about trying to change for the best for ourselves and the future generations. And that's the beauty. It's about energy, and it's renewable energy, and it's also good. And so we give you renewable energy. Okay, over to you.
Any questions? Hey, we have a hand.
Good.
I have a lot more, but I want to give the floor as well to you guys.
You talked about the economic value of conservation, and there's like a tenfold return. How do you establish the value of ecological services?
Which services?
Ecological services.
How do you value them?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's very abstract. How do you make it kind of concrete for the government to buy?
Yes, so the good thing here is that there is a methodology that is globally accepted, and that's what they call the DEEP methodology, the economics, so the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, TEEP methodology, and it has then the outcomes of a kind of a business calculation. What is the value of carbon sequestration, water purification, taxes, housing, farming, all these ecosystem services are included, and we do it systematically in the same way, so that you can compare it also with other parks in other countries, which helps us, of course, to compare, because otherwise you would come to a situation when, you know, like me, I came with a DEEP methodology with 191 million euros as revenues, as turnover, and then the criticism was, oh, here is the green guy, 191 million euros. Why not 400 million euros? Because they couldn't imagine, this is a big amount of money, of course. Huh? So, but then I could say, oh, listen to me, this is a methodology that is internationally approved, is made by UN together with the Deutsche Bank, not only, let's say, governmental, but also Deutsche Bank was involved with that. But at that time, Pavan Sukhdev, who is now the global president of WWF globally, so it's really very valuable to use that. Once you have that, of course, then again you have to translate the numbers, because it's not that easy for a lot of people to imagine what it all comes from. It's all about communication at the time. And to have good stories. And again, there is something, I think, where we can help each other with making and finding the stories that you can use, because they are universal, I think.
That calculation must be really, really complex. Is it endless debate about...
Well, it's not that complex.
Are you saying it's accepted by, or written by some organizations, but the government buy into that? You know, do they...
Well, I'm not sure if it is accepted. Yeah, that's another thing. You have to find, of course, acceptance, and that's again the lobby process. But it gives at least value. Why did they started with the DEEP methodology? It comes from the calculation that came front the climate discussion. At a certain moment in time, the global community was asking, what does global warming cost the global community? And then there was an English economist who did the calculation, and it was a budget, I don't remember, it was enormous what the cost of global warming could be. 10 years later he said, I was wrong. The cost is the double. Huh? So again, it helps. So that's why the biodiversity, the nature community said we need to have a kind of calculation of the values economically as well, and it started with that. It's a tool. It's a tool that can help, but it's not that it is, how to say, that every government agrees upon this methodology. The other thing is that, and this is a good thing, and I think I told it already in the article, at the UN level, so how do we compare normally the level of wealth of countries, of member states? It's the GDP, the gross domestic product. That's how we try to compare countries with each other, if they are wealthy or not. But there is no an element inside about welfare, there's no element inside about ecosystem services, about nature. So I think now 8 or 9 years ago, the UN started with an initiative to bring in these ecosystem services into the GDP, where you come to another calculation, of course. Then you could say that Romania is far more richer than they think they are, and not based on industry, but based on biodiversity. And this makes another you can compare differently with countries. This now, at the moment, I think there are 80 countries in the world who are using that already. And within the United Nations, they are now forcing to get this as the standard for the future. Okay, was another question, I believe.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm bringing it back to local communities from the global level, because I'm really thinking on when you work with very small communities, especially from coal areas like it was your case, but also in Florin's case. What are the ways through which you actually create a little bit of more self-esteem, I guess, for those communities, right? And in that process, you actually create agency and critical thinking about also other problems in the world. And I was wondering, like, what were your practices to not talk to them, but kind of work with them?
Yeah, it is all about, firstly, the message should be stay close to yourself. Because don't try to predict what you cannot make happen. So you have to stay close to yourself and be open for their questions that they have, because they think about the end of the month with no money anymore. Huh? So they have different difficulties that we think that they have. Social inclusion, things like that. So to be open for to have a listening ear is a step one, and makes sometimes 40% of finding a solution. Because often these people, they don't find a listening ear. And then the environmentalists come in and say, we take this into account. For instance, with my park, we have now a project that's called Everybody Deserves a Holiday. Because what we came to know is that even in my neighboring region of 50 kilometers away from the national park, a lot of families are living with not a lot of resources, and if they would like to visit the national park and they have to come with public transport with 3 children, they are already 30 euros that they have to pay to the public transport, so they cannot come to enjoy the wildlife, so they cannot come on holiday even in their own backyard. So we are now taking that into account. We are talking with new organizations and say, how can we bridge that? Can we find solutions and go to corporates or politicians, local politicians or provincial or county, and make programs for them as well. So it's about opening up. And of course, new problems occur, but it's nothing wrong. It is complex. An ecosystem is complex. Nobody has said that something is simple. But the thing I do know is that you can never do something wrong doing good. You know, we are doing good, and whatever you do is good. There are two questions also there.
I can comment to that words. For me, I think it's good to look also to another continents, because they invent already the wheel. United States, for example, they have experience of more than 100 years of nature conservation. And if you look to see what is the way for the normal American people to look to the national parks, this is the way. They are iconic, they are their culture, they are from their hearts. And I want also to see here in Romania and all over the world, the people speaking about the national park, not only about some places somewhere far away in the wilderness, to speak my national park, our nature, because this is the way to live together with the nature.
Yes, and I will, sorry, I have to tell something more about that, because it's really correct. But the nice thing is that when my national park in Belgium, established in 2006, in 2016, so when we could celebrate our decennial as it's called, it was the same year as the centennial of the National Park Service in the United States. So I asked my colleagues to dig into history. What is it? How did national parks once occurred? So, and then we came to know that one of the most recent national parks in Belgium, established by a Belgian, but the first national park in the world, I don't know if you know, is Yellowstone Park, 1872, is established also by a Belgian. Father Kuppens, Christian father, unbelievable. So I could really make some promotion of that. But to go back to what Florence said, if you go now to Yellowstone Park, there is at one entrance of the national park, there is a statue that the governor came to launch, to make public, and in the statue is encrypted for the benefit and the enjoyment of the people. And then we come back to, we give value. Value is in the eye of the beholder. So we have to really, we are nature. So it's not something that is in a protected area, it is us, it is we, and that's so important. Yeah, the iconic national parks in the United States, they are so proud of their culture and their landscape and their national parks, so we have to use that and learn about how they did it and to then bring it into our own cultures as well.
I have on the mic already. Thank you. Ignace from the University of Bucharest, institution which was not founded by a Belgian, so you cannot take bragging rights for that. I just have two quick comments. The first one is speaking on what you just talked with Florin also. I'm actually leading a project about evaluating the healthy benefits of nature in cities. And our results prove that people in Romanian cities do want nature, but they want their kind of nature, a particular nature. They don't want the disservices of nature. We don't want mosquitoes, we don't want all species, we don't want leaves falling down on our cars and stuff like that. So we need to be careful about what kind of nature we build in our cities. And the second comment, which is more like a question to you, is I heard a lot about investment, about economy, about quantifying benefits, and I do feel a bit afraid, maybe it's a philosophical question, that we are only postponing the inevitable end in trying to transform nature into economic accounts. I don't think it's a very good solution to only focus on that, even though I acknowledge its importance at this moment in providing evidence, clear evidence to decision makers and policy makers. I feel it like it's not enough. For example, in Romania, I think conservation is more of a social problem than environmental or economical. So maybe we should think also about mechanisms in which besides the economic aspect, which is very important at this point, we're trying to think ahead of us. So trying to think, because younger generation, new generations won't expect the same return and the same system that we are thinking at the moment. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, I completely agree with you. So if it was up to us, I think we should protect wildlife because of the beauty and the intrinsic values. That's why we do it, because nature has the right to be. But it doesn't deliver the situation of today, because we are losing every day hundreds and thousands of hectares of wildlife, and beauty and intrinsic values are not capable to lead up to the situation of today. So we need to find other languages, which is a socio-economic language. And I said it's not the language, it's another evidence that we have to protect wildlife. So I completely agree with you to do it differently as well, but you have to start with the mechanism that works. And that's why I think that the socio-economic benefiting, so that language helps. There is some research done, I think it was by the World Bank 10 years ago, who asked the question to all ministers globally if they knew the basics about economy. And I think 70% of all the ministers globally, of all the member states, they knew more or less the basics of economy. And the second question was if they knew the basics of ecology, and not even 20% knew the basics of ecology. Although life is more valuable, I think, than economy. Yeah? But I know you're completely right. At the moment, globally, that's my reading of the globe, that is that economy is still more powerful than intrinsic values. So a budget in balance, they like more than a planet out of balance. It's rather devastating, I think, but that's the thing. The other thing about the mosquitoes, which kind of nature that we want, so of course there are some things that are not so interesting or not so funny, not nice to have, like mosquitoes. But I think if you ask Romanians if they want to pay taxes, they also don't want to pay taxes. So yeah, there are lots of things that you can help, that can help as an argument to say, yeah, what do you do? Quit with nature? And you cannot do so. You have to do so because the benefits of nature, the ecosystem services, are far more. And if you do research, you know that the evidence on the healthy part of wildlife, even though it's our small patches of nature, it's enormous. So the positive things are far more valuable than the negative things. But of course, we have to take that into account. And the last thing about the youth is willing something different. So we have to mirror ourselves, because I'm also reading and coming into a community where the young people are all, let's say, wanting to have a sustainable world and to do the right thing. But also, I have a blind spot. There are a lot of young people who don't want that. So we have to look outside of the church as well, and sometimes see the small birds behind the elephant as well.
Connected with this, I was just wondering because if we talk with people from the community, especially the ones around the protected areas, one of the first things that they see or their first reaction is that this is a protected area. This is not gonna, I'm not going to have access to it. It's going to be forbidden for me, or something like this in that realm. And the economic factor is very important. I mean, you can always talk to people and say, look, you're going to have benefits from it. But most of the people want immediate benefits, not the ones in long term, which are the best, but they don't think about it, they want something now. So how do you approach
there are things that are immediately, that's more related to tourism, of course. That's what people see, more tourists, more, that's a simple thing. Which you can really pronunciate, articulate better, what is, so to make it visible, that's one thing. The second thing is that protected areas is not accessible is a mistake maybe we make. When Florian was telling me that maybe they would like to organize camping places, camping sites here included in the park, I was really welcoming this idea, because putting signposting with "stop, don't come in," this is, for a lot of awareness, it's negative, it's counterproductive. So what the Rewilding Europe, they experimented on that in the Netherlands, a nice project to that. So they have nature areas like 500 hectares approximately, and people are allowed to go to hike wherever they like in this 500 hectares big nature reserve. There is one restriction, but just at the beginning said, watch out for the bull. The bull. So everybody stays on the hiking paths, because they don't have to communicate anything else. Say, watch out for the bull. And everybody's looking, oh, I follow the road because otherwise the bull is over there. So simple things, new kind of communication. And yeah, I always say, biodiversity is a very serious thing, of course, but yeah, we can laugh at it. We can have some humor as well. So even though it is a very serious matter, we have to show that we are human beings who like to make fun with each other, to drink a pint of beer or coffee together. So be part of the community. So we are not external, we are internal of a community.
Just a small story about my experience. When we start to make a study for Huila Hunturareța National Park almost 20 years ago, we start as a young scientist, students, 100% nature conservation projects. This was the reality. We care then more than bears, wolves, and forests than people. Because the people, for us, was the bad guys, to come to kill the animals, to cut the trees, to destroy our beautiful mountains, and we start to do something to conserve and preserve these mountains. But in time, soon, not just in few years, keeping in direct contact with local communities, we realize that in our times, in our place, in Europe at least, it's impossible to make nature conservation without taking into consideration the interests of local communities and visitors of the area. It's impossible to put guns and guardians on the borders of the national parks or the protected areas to conserve the nature. You need to go close to communities, to discuss with them, to work with them, to find a way to conserve it, and in the end to convince the communities to invest in nature conservation, because this is the best way to conserve nature. Not to accept some government, some NGO, some money from I don't know where to come to do it. You need to do it, because it's your nature, it's your national park, it's close to you. You need to go there. And I remember one meeting in Iceland with some representative of protected areas there, and when we ask about the status of some area, category of protected areas, they say we don't have any categories, we don't have laws, because the things is happened. Why to cover with bureaucracy, with laws and paper? And this is what Ignace said, we give the values to the places, to the nature. If you give values, the nature has value. After that, is nothing.
Can you give us, because I know many stories from you, from Huila and the local communities. How do you convince the locals, for example, that it's a benefit for them to keep the forest, not cut the forest, could be in their interest?
It is not so easy, and we don't have possibility to convince 100%. It's impossible to convince all of them, because I don't know, the thief of woods, they never love us, or the poachers, or some illegal guys. But we translate some way the biodiversity conservation in social and economic benefits. And we start to calculate with our roughly tools how was the return of investment of our projects in the community. And we calculate that 300,000 euro giving to the communities for different things from our projects It's return investment for local communities about more than 30 million euro. And from this moment, some officials, they say, let's discuss what is this 100 times multiply your investment. Some of them, they say, you are liars. It's impossible to be like that. But we start the discussions, and we start to explain. The national parks means 25,000 visitors yearly. The national parks means some jobs, means some local products, means markets for visitors or something like that. And in time, we start to convince few of them. And we start from zero, was no any tourist activities and business locally, but now we already have 7 businesses in one village. And they think now, if you speak about the forest for the people from the countryside is the place where they go to take the wood. And that's it. Maybe some mushrooms or some plants or some meat. But in the end, if they will look to the tourism activities, they say, oh, come on, there are some crazy guys from Bucharest and they are coming to pay to listen to the birds or to stay in shadow of the forest or to take some pictures with the landscape. This means this forest has also another value. And they look in this direction, not only to wood, to firewood or what kind of wood, they would look also to the forest. And immediately the forest is an asset of the area.
So maybe to add, to say something positive, how things can change. The big 5, Africa, everyone knows the big 5. 15 years ago, we went shooting them dead. We went for shooting, hunting them dead. Within 15 years, we reach now the level that people go to shoot pictures of the big 5. There is, of course, a king in Spain and a dentist in the United States who still shoot them. But you see how the shift is starting, that we start to think differently about what we once did, shooting these animals to death. And the other thing, what I would bring in is the lessons we can learn out of COVID. Because I don't know if you were aware what has happened. So for the first time, we were finding a vaccine 3 times faster than we ever thought before it was possible. So working together helps. Secondly, we were listening to the scientists again, and the virologists, so to say, okay, there is a huge problem. We didn't discuss about the cost, because we thought it was a necessity to do so to save our lives. And we changed our behavior even, which we thought we never would do. Social distance, wearing of masks. So if the lessons learned from COVID, they prove that it is possible to change. And that's something we need to take into account to say, hey, to become a believer. Yeah, we need to believe that it is possible. And if we start today, it will be certainly a win.
Also, COVID was a big, returning to nature for more people. I mean, we could clearly see that for people who were never really in touch with it, found it. Yeah. That was amazing to discover too. Any more questions?
If nobody has, I have one, and I can start with my.
You have the mic, so.
Yeah, if you can hear me, then it's okay. I was maybe curious, and for some stories I know, to share how each of you has engaged children and teenagers and young people in your actions, and how those kinds of involvement impacted their lives and the work that you do.
If I can start, I think children and youth is so important, but again, looking to the community, the environmental movement, we made a mistake, I think, that what we did was we did big conferences in Europe and globally, and then we said, oh, we have to incorporate the youth. And then we say, okay, now youth, are you ready? You have the podium. And they did the dance or whatever, and then we said, oh, it's so important. And then we went back to business. So the youth had for a few moments its fame, and then it stopped. So when I became president of Europark Federation, so it's an elected body, and it's not a governmental body, it's an NGO, but there's a council of 11 people. So I said, now I want to go to 10 people, but 1 seat is for the youth. We will, the youth can elect themselves, and they have 1 representative in the Council of Europark Federation in the seat where the decision is made. And that is something that we communicated to our members at Europark level, from, hey, try to do the same thing, try to involve young people, because they are the future, and you have to give them the seat on the decision table, not just on the stage for half an hour. So bring them in, because they do sometimes have stupid ideas, and I still have stupid ideas myself, so there's nothing wrong with that, but give them the floor. That was one thing, and secondly is that in my park we started to have junior rangers, so it's bringing these youngsters up to make a difference, because if you can really make them excited, to become excited about nature, it becomes part of their lives, and to make the story circle around. So I was, after the successful national park in Belgium, I was asked often to create national parks, everywhere, and also until in South Korea, but then suddenly also in the Netherlands. They asked me, can you make another national park? It's the NL Delta, where the rivers, the Rhine comes into the North Sea and things like that. And I said, okay, I would try to do so on one condition, that you don't pay me. For Dutch people, it's completely crap if you tell something like that you don't have to be paid. But I told them, if there was one condition, the money that you have available for this position, so for me, you have to invest in the youth. That's the only, so that, again, junior rangers could be organized. They have done that. We didn't succeed to make a national park because the coalition of the stakeholders couldn't agree in the end. Because I think that's important when you start a national park, that you have the local community included, agreeing with the protection of nature. And if you don't have this agreement, of course, then something happens and you have to wait 5 years longer to have the discussion longer. But again, it was investing in young people, in youth is crucial. I think you have to include them in the highest level as you can.
Yeah, for me, when I work with people, because I'm a geologist and normally I work with dead animals and rocks, the most beautiful part of working with people is working with kids. And the best satisfaction is like that. A few weeks ago, I received a mail from one kid from my village, and he texted me, thank you, I just graduated the university, biology science, and this is because of you, because I was part in junior ranger program a few weeks ago. And this is for me the impact. And also when I discuss with some politicians, I am from Vâlcea County, and we are not so lucky with politicians. And for many years we don't have any success to discuss with some of them. But suddenly, a few years ago, the generation was changing and there are coming some new politicians, and one of the best working with him is the prefect of the county, and it's just because this prefect was also junior ranger in our program a few years ago. And this is the seeds with great results. And for my opinion, junior ranger program, it's one of the beautiful program on the world related to nature education, and I'm very happy because we discussed with the Romanian presidency and another body, including educational ministry, to have a green week in the program of the schools, and also to try to extend the junior ranger program on the national level. Because we have a lot of national parks, Danube Delta Reserve, a lot of natural reserves, and a lot of small initiative of junior ranger in Romania. And we have a lot of potential because all the nature is a school. We don't need infrastructure to teach the kids about the nature because we already have.
For those who don't know, this is a program that brings kids into the mountain national
Yes,
parks.
yes.
Stay around the professionals.
Yeah, we have it's a program actually. We start with a presentation in schools. We go with rangers, with NGOs, with scientists in school, and we present to the kids different things, animals, fluffy things, flowers, activities related with adventure things. And after that we continue with the small trips in the park, some hiking, one-day trips in natural reserve, and we discuss about small things. And after we continue with the camps. We spent 3-4 days in the nature, in tents, without phone signals. We choose specially these places. It's also refreshing and very healthy for us to work with kids in nature.
What's the program called?
Junior Ranger.
What age?
You can find it in our website. In Hogayon, it's a Junior Ranger program.
But if someone wants to copy it, they can copy
Yes,
it.
sure. It's not our problem. We copy a lot of things from the United States, from different nations.
Okay, we fight who is talking first. Anyways, thank you very much for being here. Yeah? It's interesting everything you told us. I just wanted to say something regarding education. No doubt education is the most important thing, I think. But for this moment in Romania, at least from our point of view, from the analytical point of view, we are leaking of competence in the local administrations of biodiversity knowledge and nature conservation knowledge and so on. So if we have an idea from outside, and we have all beautiful ideas, and we want to come somewhere in Romania, I would extend it on very large parts of the European Union, and you want to talk with the administration, with the mayor, or with the local council, there's no competence. So if you want to talk about building houses, of course, you have architects which are employed. So I think at this moment, it's very important to make a lobby to change the administrations or to add to the actual administrations services, directions, and so on, where the local councils should budget to employ people like we are all here together. Otherwise, it takes too long. So education usually takes one generation, or you said the prefect was young. It took 10 years.
Yes, but I have 5,000 more.
Okay. So, no, but that's another problem. Anyways, we have now to act and to make lobby to create these jobs in the local administration.
And do you see a kind of a trend change already?
No, we are trying this in Brasov the first time. So we make this proposal and to create such a direction inside the local administration. We're working for this, and okay, it's the mayor is, let's say, a friend of us, so he's also part of the team somehow. But the local fights led to the results that already I think 11th or 12th time, the adverse parties, they didn't vote the new organigram of the administration. But we're keeping fighting.
What you see in Belgium and other Western European countries, they are obliged to employ coordinators for environment. For
exactly. Environment is something else. Yes, you have the same law, and it remembered my father in the mid-80s in Dortmund, which is similar to same problems and so on. And he was one of the first soil scientists working for the local environment. But in Romania, you have environmental problems usually are dealing with garbage, with air pollution and so on, but not with nature conservation and biodiversity. So this part should be extended, and it's something like an appeal. We should talk about that, and we should lobby for this. Yeah.
And there was another question?
Oh, now. Big Panther is there.
So, I have a more sentimental question, and we've talked about technicalities, putting the price tag on the environment, and so on and so forth. But I have a question for both of you. What triggered your personality or your person to turn towards nature? Because maybe your words will inspire other people that will see this dialogue here.
If I go back to, there are two stories, but I try to stick to one. When I was 9 years old, I was playing in the meadows in the backyard of my house, my parents' house, and suddenly I found on a hedge a ladybird, you know, with these black spots, this little insect, this beetle, and I thought, this must be mine. So what I did was I ran inside and I stole the box of matches of my daddy. I put out the matches, and then I was looking again for my ladybird, and in the end I found one, most probably not the same, but I put it in the box of matches and I took some grass leaves because I thought it needs to eat, and it was mine. And I put it in my trousers, and 30 times a day I opened it, and it was so beautiful. But the third day I have to do this with the box of matches because my ladybird died. So I remembered that when I became 22 maybe, and it was a huge metaphor, of course, because if you put nature in a box with no light, with no water, with sulfur, so with poisonous chemistry, it dies. So for me, this was an eye-opener when I was 20 years old, like that. Whoa, we cannot put nature in a box. It's not possible. And then I tell the second one, that was my hero thing. Huh? So I became a herpetologist, and I did research on frogs and lizards, but also on a very special species. It's called the midwife toad. The midwife toad is a special toad that reproduces on land, not they mate on land, not in the water. And I found a population on an old graveyard, on a mountainous top, an old graveyard, very sun exposed, so it was very warm. It was one of the most northern, let's say, populations in Europe. And it was an old graveyard, an old church with stability problems. And these old graveyards, they were like, were more or less broken, but in these small holes, these toads were living. Of course, it was their habitat, special habitat. But then suddenly, the local community, they said, well, there are so old graveyards, the family doesn't exist anymore. So with All Saints, the next All Saints, we will look to these old graves, and those who are not visited, they will disappear because we want to give space to new people who have died. But of course, then the church needs to re-stabilize with chemical things. And I would like to have my meeting with the mayor, say, don't do this, because this is my habitat of my midwife toads. So, and then I went into the local newspaper that they want to get rid of the old graveyards not visited by All Saints. So what I did then was buying a bunch of flowers with All Saints, and I went to the graveyard and looked where there was no flowers. So I was putting flowers on all these graveyards to win time and to try. And then suddenly I got my meeting with the mayor, and so the graveyards are still there now, the graves. So that was my hero, which really enforced me to say it is possible. With not a lot of resources, it is possible to do the right thing. This was,
For me, I'm so lucky because I was born in one of the most beautiful places on the planet. And nature, it's in me from the beginning. I don't have any moment, illumination or something like that when somebody throw me in. But I have a moment when together with my friends in the mountains, I look for the first time to our mountains with a thread, because was a moment in 1999 when was the total eclipse, sun eclipse in Romania, and the 100% visibility was in our county. And this mountain, Buila-Vânturarița, was a mountain, it's a mountain where few people are going every year. We are all friends, family mountains. And suddenly, all the mountains were full of Japanese people with photo camera, thousands of people coming to look to the eclipse. And this was the moment when we think for the first time, we say, we are not prepared for this. If we'll go in this direction, our mountains will be destroyed. And this was the moment when we decided to do something to make a national park there. Not national park, to protect. I invent the moment. I don't have.
There is a legend of, you know, the Chinese legend of the two frogs? Yeah. Two frogs, they were living in a pond and they said, well, I know everything. This is not good enough for me. I want to move. I want to go somewhere else, to live somewhere else. And it's not good enough for me. So they started to move, to migrate. And he come across another toad at the other side of the mountain, because they were going up. And the frog on the other side also thought, I need to move because it's not beautiful enough anymore. And then on top of the mountain, they came together and they said, yeah, I would like to move because that's crap over there. And then they said, but can we see? We cannot see enough where to go to. And so they decided to help each other to stand up with their front legs together to see where to go to their new habitats. But you know, the green frogs, they have eyes on top of their heads. So they were looking back to their own region from a different perspective and said, wow, this is so beautiful, I have to go to that place. So they went back where they came from and they lived very long. So looking with different eyes to your own place and from a different perspective can help you to do the right thing in your own location.
We have time for one more question, if anyone wants to have it. I can do it.
Yeah, I was wondering, because I know the organization that you lead works with a lot of companies of business sector, and I was wondering how did you notice that their interest and their motivation in supporting the conservation of nature has been changed in the last 10 or even more 20 years, and what might be the trends in the business sector supporting the conservation of nature?
Yeah, where to begin? So you have to think that business sector is a simple sector when it comes to a business model. They say, okay, what do we put in the business model? It's possible to do this, that, and then come the constraints. Sustainability, you have to safeguard some trees, and maybe they say, okay, this little forest we can take into account, but if you want to have 1,000 hectares to be protected, we cannot do this. So it's very simple to articulate what you want, and they will decide we do it, it is fitting in our business plan or not. That's a simple thing. But if you start to have a discussion, it becomes interesting. So, for instance, our national park, where we started, in the middle of that national park was a big sand extracting company. Sibelco is one of the world leaders. Because of, in my region, they dig very deep, and we found the whitest sand in the world, even whiter than the deserts of Saudi Arabia. So the Hubble telescope, the mirror of the Hubble telescope is made out of sand that is found in my national park. So I started with them a conversation because it didn't fit anymore with our objectives of a national park to go and dig for sand all the time. It lasted 3 years. But then suddenly they came to the conclusion that there are far more advantages if they moved than if they stayed. Because it would become a national park, the focus came to them and questioning them, why are you still here? So it was negative promotion. Secondly, they had a kind of a facility where they prepared the sand into diamonds. So they could build a new factory based on the best available techniques again after 30 years. So it was new techniques there. And they could do, and that was what was decisive, they could do something really good in communication. And it was, because they have sand extracting sites all over the world. They could communicate when we leave, a national park occurs. So when we opened our national parks, all the television stations were there, but the Sibelco company, they were there with 10 cameras. Because they want to have that, and they promoted that. So we are leaving now, even 10 years before the business plan ended, to move away, but we give it back to nature. And that's for them. And I still talk to the CEO of them and say, that was the best decision ever. Because that was the promotion that they wanted. It was sustainable, everything, the discussion started, and they want more clients than before. So it is about talking, drinking coffee all the time, and convince them. And yeah, and sometimes you fail. I don't see this with the light. Sometimes you fail as well. I have opponents as well. Don't get me wrong. It's not that because maybe you feel now it's only a success story. No, the writer who only can write success books, that doesn't exist. And so you know, a lot of things are failing as well. Also in my company, but there are things that are successful, and I try to live on these positive projects and try to exchange with people like Florian in the community of Ashoka to exchange and to give energy to all of you to say, come on, if I can do it, you can do it as well. I'm not that special. Everybody can do it, and that's why that was also in the article this morning. That's why I'm very close to the Ubuntu philosophy from South Africa that says, I am because we are. So we are a huge community, and each part of the community has a role to play. Is it as in a school, at the university, is it a factory, or is it at a global level for a park, wherever everyone has a role to play? I am because of we are.
I want to ask the last question, but before I have to ask a follow-up question to what Nicoleta asked, because we started the conversation of partnerships with companies. I have to ask, from your point of view, where do you draw the line between good partnerships and bad partnerships? Are there some types of companies we shouldn't? I mean, where do you draw the line at greenwashing, and what's your stand on that?
The most difficult question comes at the end, of course. Well, it's difficult to answer because the question is, from which point of view do you look to companies? Do you look to them as a picture at a certain moment and evaluate on that? Then you could say, okay, this is greenwashing, go out. Or do you look at them as a process? When you look to the process, often you see companies starting to kickstart to become more sustainable, and you think, come on, this crap, it's not good what you're doing, but you see the process is going up. So they need help then, I think, if the process is going up. So you have to give them the benefit of the doubt as well, because I had once also the opportunity to have the benefit of the doubt. On the other hand, of course, sometimes it is very obvious that it is only greenwashing. To give you a flavor of that, I think that it was Greenpeace International that did the calculation 3 years ago about the carbon compensation that big corporates do. And they say often, yeah, we will plant a tree in the rainforests to compensate. So Greenpeace was calculating all the trees that all these big corporates has promised for the rainforest, and they calculated that we need 2 planets to plant them. So there's a lot of greenwashing still going on. So it is about not immediately judging, to be open enough to make mistakes, and to also to companies that they can make a mistake, like we do all. But if they go the wrong direction, to be very prompt, like we did with the climate court case. And then you say, okay, now we sue you. Sorry, this is not. But I think you have to give them the benefit of the doubt. And the question is, do you look to the process? And if you see good things, please help them. And don't take a picture and just focus on that, because you could be wrong then.
Okay, now for the last question, because we're talking 2 hours have passed, and I don't want to keep you more, but you can also talk with them in the break we're going to have after. Let's say we're looking in the future.
we have everything. We have funds, we have the support of local communities, of the politicians, we have tourists. Is there a moment where we're going to overdo it and we're going to stress nature too much, then we're going to go on reverse? This is a question for both. Are you guys talking about this topic in your communities, that there's going to come a time in the future where there are going to be just too many people out there in nature?
Yes, I would say read my book, but it's in Dutch. Right? So, but that's about the world population, and it's a big debate. Are we too much, and what to do about that? So a lot of research is done about that. So the best way to go as fast as possible to less people is education, women in developing countries. That's the bottom line. So it's not about, let's now just make one child, and the best thing is education, and we have really good results in the world for that. The good news on the world population is that we are still growing as a world population. We are now 7.9 billion people, and we will probably grow until 11 billion. But the good news is that the speed of acceleration is slowing down. So we grow a little bit less fast than before. So we have reached the top. So we are going downside. So I think the last billion, every 11 years there was a new billion people now. And so now it's already 12 years. So it's still a lot. And to give you a clue, COVID doesn't mean anything on the global population rates. So, because you have to know, I think there are 320,000 babies born every day. People die as well, so approximately netto, there is 240, 250,000 people every day that are on plus on the world population. But we are going slowly down. And so they calculated also, is it possible to nourish 11, even 18 billion people? It is possible, but then they didn't took into account whether it was still livable, because they don't take nature into account. They just calculated, is it possible to grow enough food for 18 billion people, and it is possible on the food level. But then I think because of Chief Seattle, then it's done. And we don't, again, one maybe important message, the planet doesn't need us. We need the planet. So.
Yeah, I'm a geologist, and I know the planet don't need us. The life on the Earth has 3.8 billion years. No. And we are only 300,000 euros, let's say, roughly. But if you look globally and to the microscope, we have some real problem, because there is no any balance till now. If you look to my community, my village loses every year 1.5 of the population, just because difference between babies and deaths. If you add people after 18, when they have 18, they go away to university for jobs in the foreign countries or in another many cities, the situation is very bad. And this area is the area where we have in our country the most valuable part of the nature. This is the paradox, where we have a best nature on the planet, we have very poor social economical communities. And these communities want also some benefits to evaluate from social and economical perspective. They say, why you in UK you burn coal 300 years to evaluate, and we don't have possibility now, why? we need also comfort. But also in the same time, when I work in the companies, in the big corporation, one Indian guy asked me one time, imagine if each man on the planet one fridge. It's impossible to have resources for all of them. The big companies already know about the lack of the resources on the planet. And this is I think the threat for me. I don't know if you are so smart to keep the balance between the nature resources and the needs of the global population. And if we find this key, and I think we can find it because we are smart, we are, we find a solution to survive also as a species on the planet.
I will add a story about economy and how to change that, because it's something that is starting at the moment. You all have heard about a very important person, and it was Edison. He invented the light bulb.
Debate. Yes.
Yeah, it's a debate. It's a debate. But let's say that he invented the light bulb, because it is not important for my story. Now, what happened was there were a lot of young engineers at the time who were trying to make this light bulb better, to perform better. And what happened was that in 1901, in California, in Livermore, it's a city in California, in a fireware factory, there was a guy who was just putting the light bulb in and switched on the light. And this light is still burning after 121 years. There is a camera on that. You can Google it, so you can see live a light burning for 121 years. The camera, there were I think already 7 cameras broken, because it breaks down, but the light didn't break. So now what happened is that the factories and the corporates that were producing all these light bulbs, they said, this is a bad business plan. Because if we can make such good light bulbs, we cannot earn a lot of money because they will sustain so long. So they decided to come together in Switzerland, and it's called the Phoebus Conspiracy, where all the producers of light bulbs said, let's do something different. We're going to make light bulbs that can last only for 1,000 hours, and then they need to break down. And those who try to produce light bulbs that live longer, they have to pay a fine. Now, that's how we organized our Western liberal economy. So, new is almost broken. New is always for the bin. New today is outdated tomorrow. So, this is a complete, destructive way of doing economy. And now we are on that shift towards what they called circular economy, but I think we need to go one step further, and it's the regenerative economy. So the circular economy says something different, that is, you don't buy a light bulb, and that's for the young people over there. There will be a time that you won't buy light bulbs anymore, but you will buy a light. You will say, I would like to have 100,000 hours or 10,000 hours of light. And then they will say, I hope one light bulb can sustain for 10,000 hours. So they completely change the system, not a light bulb of 1,000 hours, but they will produce light bulbs that last 10,000 hours, because it costs less for them. It is happening at the moment. So the Schiphol, that is the airport of the Netherlands, they ordered light. And they get light now. They didn't order new light bulbs anymore. So that's what they call the circular economy. So we will not buy a car in the future, but mobility. You will say, okay, I would like to have 100,000 kilometers, and I would like to do it with a BMW or a Ford. And what does the factory says? I hope he can sustain with one car, because if we have to produce 5, so it's the reverse. The regenerative economy goes a step further, and it is not harming nature, and even restoring nature with the circular economy. And that's something new, and again, women are important in that. So you have Kate Raworth, she's an economist from the Oxford University with the donut economy. I don't go into deep with that. But also Marina Mazzucato, she's originally from Italy, and she has also done really interesting research that says that the governmental support to startups, so often governments give money to startups like Apple. They got in the beginning of their startup a lot of governmental money, and then they became successful, multi-billionaires, trillionaires, and they don't give anything back to the society. So this is what is happening now, so that is where you have to become optimistic. It is happening. It's of course small at the moment, but you know how it went with our mobile cell phones, smartphones, suddenly everybody has it. So it comes to a point that it changes, and so this is what's happening in our economy at the moment. It starts to shift to the right direction. So I'm hopeful.
Thank you. On that note, I hope this conversation brought a bit of light in each of you, and thank you for being here tonight. And thank you, Ignace, thank you, Florin, for being part of the conversation. And yes, Nico, I think you have something else to say.
Mm-hmm. Yes. We would love for you guys to scan that QR code, because we would love to have your feedback for the event this evening. Also, if you like to keep up with us, to receive notices or to support the activities that we have for the protection of urban nature, you can leave us your email, and we can keep you updated with all the actions that we have planned and we will develop from now on. So please scan that QR code and leave us your feedback. And thank you very much for being here.